Hey class, so I'm feeling a little bit better, so I decided I'd make a very hopefully brief video where I walk you through an example of responding to the second prompt. Um, I think there was only one person absent, but just to recap, the second prompt is asking that you connect a chart to a specific passage. So what you have in front of you here, or sorry, what you see in front of you is an article about cell phones. So let's read through this together and then note for yourself what you think the argument is, and we'll go from there. So it starts with walking the hallways between classes at Fern Creek High School in Louisville, Kentucky. I dodge students whose heads are turned down to glowing screens. Earbuds and brightly colored headphones are everywhere. And when I peer into classrooms, I see students tuning out their peers and teachers and focusing instead on YouTube and social media. So I told you this in the last video. I think it's really important to annotate each individual paragraph for what is being done, right? In other words, what kind of information am I given? And then also the paragraph's purpose. So for me, this paragraph is important because it's the author's observations, and clearly it seems like he's trying to show me that cell phones cause students to be distracted, right? This isn't a positive portrayal of students using their cell phones. So then we go to, these are issues I deal with as an English teacher at Fern Creek. I have guidelines for cell phone and smartphone use, but it's a constant struggle to keep kids engaged in lessons and off their phones. Even when I know I have created a well structured and well paced lesson plan, it seems as if no topic, debate, or activity will ever trump the allure of the phone. So here we find out for sure that the author is an English teacher, right? So in terms of thinking about credibility, we're maybe thinking this person is credible to talk about cell phone usage in the classroom, or maybe you might find that this person is biased because he has a specific agenda. The other thing that we see is he is talking about the allure of the cell phone and the fact that the cell phone poses a threat to his classroom, right? And the threat is no matter how well designed his lesson is, it seems as though the cell phone is always taking over, is always distracting his students. Then we have many teachers at Fern Creek are stumped about how to deal with student cell phone and smartphone use. On the one hand, we know that most students bring a mini supercomputer to school every day, a device with vast potential for learning. On the other hand, just how and even if smartphones might help students learn remains a troubling question. It's especially vexing with regard to students who already have low achievement levels or learning problems. So here it seems like this paragraph is really focused on the problem at hand, right? Or the dilemma. Cell phones are great because they're supercomputers, right? But at the same time, they become a problem. And here is where we're seeing the author's specific interest in the low achieving students and the way cell phone usage impacts low achieving students. According to our principal, roughly 75% of Fern Creek students are considered gap kids under Kentucky's definition. Students who belong to groups that, on average, have historically performed below achievement goals. These sometimes overlapping groups include students receiving free or reduced price lunch, African American students, English language learners, and special education students. More than half of our GAP students scored at the novice, which is the lowest level, on last year's 10th grade reading exam. I frequently talk with colleagues about the possibility and challenge of using phones to help GAP students from all backgrounds learn. So here we're posed with a question. Can cell phone usage help GAP students? It seems as though this paragraph, this entire paragraph, is really interested in showing us why this author is interested in this question? And the answer to that is because uh, so many of Fern Creek students are considered gap kids. So that's why he's especially interested in the way cell phones impact gap students. Because of my own frustration with school phone use and spurred on by conversations with colleagues, I decided to delve the research about smartphones and education. Can and should smartphones be used to enhance learning for all students, or should we avoid using phones in class because of the distractibility factor and because many kids seem resistant to using them for learning? So again, here he's posing the question and his interest about smartphones. Research supporting the idea that smartphones specifically can be used to enhance learning for all students, even underachievers, is hard to find. Reread that sentence, because what he's saying is there isn't a lot of research out there about how smartphones can enhance learning for students. However, Stanford University's 2014 study on at-risk students learning with technology concludes that providing one-to-one access to devices in school provide the most benefit. The study does not, however, mention smartphones as a choice tool to achieve greater engagement and academic success. In other words, this is the first bit of evidence, right? And so if we see evidence, we have to start thinking claim. This evidence is showing us that smartphones aren't the best tool to achieve engagement, and that one-on-one access is helpful, or the most beneficial for students. So you could really say that this evidence is supporting the claim that smartphones are not the most beneficial tool for student success, right? So I'm sort of working backwards in that way. If you want to re-listen to what I just said, that might be helpful, because some of you were noting that you were having a hard time finding claims. And so the easiest way to find a claim is to look at the evidence that's being given and ask yourself, what does this evidence prove? It's similar to what we were doing when we were looking at facts from the chart and we were asking ourselves, what do these facts prove? So the same thing, what does this evidence help the author prove? And that answer usually is the claim. Okay. Then we go to, he is interviewing a psychologist, Richard Freed, a clinical psychologist. And this clinical psychologist says high levels of smartphone use by teens often have a detrimental effect on achievement because teen phone use is dominated by entertainment, not learning applications. So again, we have evidence, right? And this evidence is a psychologist's testimony, and he's saying smartphone usage, particularly high smartphone usage, has a detrimental effect for teens. I consider the Stanford study and my conversation with Freed as I observe students in my own classroom. Struggling students seem to be more susceptible than their higher achieving peers to using their smartphones for non-educational purposes. Also, the device does make a difference. When I design and schedule instruction allowing for one-to-one computer access, students get better results than when I try the same thing with one-to-one phone access. So here we have his observations, and he's using those observations to support the claim that computer usage is way more beneficial than cell phone usage. And you might remember that we cited this as a claim earlier when we were looking at this Stanford study. So that one claim has the Stanford study to support it, as well as his own personal observation. Then we have a paragraph where the author is citing Breonna Crowley. She's a person who actually he thought was an advocate for cell phone usage in the classroom. She believes in this thing called open access. And so what he does is he brings her up, right? And I think he's bringing her up in a moment in a moment of showing pathos, in a moment of showing that he is interested in what the other side is saying. And he cites what she finds, even as someone who's an advocate for open access. She finds that many students who may wait, yeah, sorry, I just want to make sure it's the right thing. Still, even Crowley has noticed the challenges for struggling students. Many students who may perform poorly on academic measures seem to see their devices as useful for a narrow range of tasks, most of which involve passive consuming of entertainment or knowledge level content. She wrote in an email, if all students are to be successful using smartphones and other technology for learning, Crowley added, then it's clear that different students may need different activities and different types of support from teachers. So here, I think the strongest piece of evidence for his argument is him using Crowley, who's an advocate for cell phone usage, and she says it doesn't work all the time, and that there are some shortfalls to cell phone usage in the classroom, specifically the fact that it's such a passive form of acquiring information. Passive means the student is not necessarily involved in getting the information, right? They're just sort of clicking away, but they're not interacting with it. They're not asking questions of it. And so passive learning is not necessarily the best kind of learning. It has to be active learning for it to be beneficial for students. Then we go to, I'm skipping around. I'm going to send this alongside the video so you can reread it at your leisure. Then we go to the principal of Fern Creek, and he says cell phones and easy access to social media are also at the root of much of the student disruption and conflict that happens on campus. So this is another bit of evidence to talk about the negative impact of cell phones. Then we have another study in which they find that mobile phone bans have very different effects on different types of students. Banning mobile phones improves outcomes for the low achieving students the most and has no significant impact on high achievers. In other words, if you ban cell phones, people do better. Low achieving students do better. Analysis of other academic metrics seem to support limiting students' smartphone access too. Researchers at Kent State University, for example, found that among college students, more daily cell phone use correlated with lower overall GPAs. The research team surveyed more than 500 students, controlling for demographics and high school GPA, among other factors. If college students are affected by excessive phone use, then surely younger students with too much access to their phones and too little self-control and guidance would be just as affected academically, if not more. So this is to show you that college students are impacted by cell phone usage. And it's trying to draw the link that if college students are impacted, then of course younger students will be as well. Then we conclude with this little bit from the principal where he talks about public school system lifting its ban on cell phones, and he says it's like giving kids equal access to cigarettes and candy, which I think is, again, evidence to show that cell phones should really be banned from the classroom. Okay, so I read through this entire article. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to just outline for myself the arguments, the claims, and the evidence for those specific claims. In figuring out the argument, I need to ask myself, what is the purpose of this article? What is it trying to prove throughout the entire essay? I believe it's trying to prove that cell phone usage in the classroom comes with a specific set of problems. I think this is the only argument that encompasses all of the different pieces of evidence that he's showing me. Then I need to figure out the different claims being used to support the argument. And again, claims are the many debatable statements used to support the larger purpose of the paper. For me, I always suggest just finding two claims, mostly because you're not going to be asked to do much more than that. So you want to sort of be mindful of your time. Immediately, the first claim that I realized as I was reading is children with open access to cell phones perform worse than children without open access. In other words, if children have free reign on cell phone usage, they are going to perform worse than children without free reign for cell phone usage. And to support this, he gives a testimony from a psychologist, right, where Freed says that if you use cell phones, you're going to be impacted negatively if you're a child, more so than if you don't use cell phones. And then that Kent State study, where we are trying to link college students to kids in the classroom, right? That was right over here. I feel like those two pieces of information are really helping to support this claim. The other claim I think is happening, low achievement students do worse when given access to cell phones. This is, I think, probably the most important claim because he does all of that information about, his school being a gap school or having gap students. And so he's really trying to prove to us that low achievement students suffer the most when we have cell phones in the classroom. And to support this, he does a lot of work with gap students, right? He explains what gap students are. And then he gives us that research from Murphy early on. Just want to show it to you so that you believe me, which I'm sure you already do, but just in case, right here, right, straight word for word, we find that mobile phone bans have impact. Banning mobile phones improves outcomes for low achieving students, right? So that's, whoops, skipped ahead. That's another claim. And again, notice I'm doing claim and then the evidence to support this specific claim, and then the evidence to support this specific claim. Another claim that's being made that might not be as important is that computer access is more useful than cell phone access. So he isn't sort of this old Scrooge who's saying no technology. He thinks technology is valuable. He just thinks that mobile devices aren't valuable or as valuable as other pieces of technology. Okay, so I go through that process. The next thing I need to do is look at my chart because remember, you're going to be given a chart. So I picked the one that Siham, Marlon, Mimi, and Sabrina looked at. It's the value proposition for using mobile devices within instruction. So remember, I identify, right? I notice that there are 3 different colors, 3 different groups. I notice that this is surveying different people and what they believe the value of mobile devices is within the classroom. Now, for my sake, we're going to say that when this person says mobile devices, they're meaning cell phones, okay? In fact, this is what they're referring to, but I know there are a couple of you out there who are thinking, well, couldn't you say mobile devices means something else or is more inclusive? For our sake, we're going to say mobile devices means cell phones, right? So I need to figure out some facts that I'm gathering from this chart. And I need to figure out very specific facts. So the facts that I gathered are these 2. Mobile devices are valued for its ability to extend learning beyond the school day, right? That was a little, this part. So that is valued. 59% of principals believe this, 53% of teachers believe this is a value of cell phones, and 60% of parents believe this is a value of cell phones. Additionally, 64% of principals believe that cell phones can increase student engagement. So these are the 2 facts that I'm interested in from the graph. Now you can choose how you want to do this. I like to do the fact finding before I answer the prompt because I've already read the passage, so I have an idea of the kind of facts I'm looking for. But others say that they like to try to answer what they can of the prompt and then see what kind of facts they're in need of and sort of pick and choose in that way. I don't like that way because I feel like it can lead to jumps in your writing, but it's your choice. So now we need to actually write. I just want to show you, I'm going to use the same formula that I've given you. The first sentence, title of graph supports or counters the argument that the passage is making. So here you go. Value proposition, that's the title of the graph, counters the argument made in smartphones hurt the classroom. The passage argues cell phone usage in the classroom causes problems for students. Now you might say to yourself, well, this is 2 sentences, I know, but I wanted to make sure you saw that I'm answering the prompt. I'm saying that this counters the argument made in the passage, and I'm also giving the argument that the passage is making. It's quite possible that you can combine these two. You can say value proposition counters the argument made in smartphones hurt the classroom that cell phone usage in the classroom causes problems for students. Either way, I'm fine. I just want to make sure for those of you who are uncomfortable with longer sentences that you see that you have the option of breaking it apart into 2 sentences. The next thing I told you need to do is identify a claim that the passage makes, keeping in mind that this claim is something that it should be related to the evidence that you're interested in. Sorry, that's my dog. Okay, should be fine now. All right, so we're identifying a claim that the passage makes. To support this argument, the article claims low achievement students perform worse when given access to cell phones in the classroom. So you'll remember that's coming directly from my annotation, right, where I put this as a claim here. So that's the next sentence. Then I'm summarizing the evidence used, right? This is another word for evidence, logos, pathos, and ethos, used to support this claim. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. The article uses a substantial amount of studies to support this claim. This is a general sentence that explains the kind of evidence used to support the claim. So for a lot of you, I think Anwara and Rosalind, you were saying, well, how do I start? You can start in this way, right? You can say the article uses and then identify the kind of evidence used to support the claim. And then I get into specifics. Specifically, the article cites researchers who found, and then I'm giving a direct quote. So Anwara, you asked about when can you give a quote. This is specific words from a researcher, so I'm going to, directly quote. Banning mobile phones improves outcomes for low achieving students the most and has no significant impact on high achievers. Then I do this thing that I don't think I explicitly mentioned, but that is useful. I set up the transition for the graph. I say what isn't presented though is whether students, parents, and or a wide array of school administrators agree with the findings of these studies. So what this sentence is doing is saying, hey, yes, this evidence is provided to support this claim, but there is something missing. That's so that I can now naturally transition into the chart, right? And show how this chart is what's missing, but the chart shows something that actually hurts the claim that this author is trying to make. So let's move on to the key piece of information. In fact, the chart shows 59% of principals, 53% of teachers, and 60% of parents value mobile devices for its ability to extend learning beyond the school day. That's the fact, right? And again, I created this link. I say, well, the evidence doesn't have any sort of consensus between students and administrators, and then voila, this fact is about principals, administrators, and parents, right? Then I have to explain the value of or why this fact from this chart is so significant, how it's related to the the passage, sorry. So here I go. If so many school administrators find cell phone usage in the classroom to extend learning, then the studies cited by the article are weakened. After all, extending learning would only increase achievement. Additionally, if the studies are no longer valid, the entire claim weakens as it no longer has sufficient evidence to prove cell phone usage as harmful for low achieving students. So notice I'm using those words, right? Sufficient evidence, valid. These are really important words. I just want to clarify something. If so many school administrators find cell phone usage to be valuable because it extends learning, I think that's clearer. then the studies cited by the article are weakened. After all, yeah, so now it makes more sense. So I sort of summarize what the quote shows, right? This is what the quote is showing in my own words. Then I say, well, if this study or this fact from this chart is true, then it hurts the studies, right? The evidence that the article gives. And then I go on to explain if if the evidence is now not valid in the article, then the claim is weakened as well, right? Because this claim can only be as strong as the credibility of the evidence. The evidence is no longer valid, so the claim is weakened because without this study, there's not enough evidence to prove that low achieving students are impacted by cell phone usage. And that's really how I can end the entire response. Now, and I'm thinking of Anita, who was talking about word count. I wanted you to see that altogether, this is 196 words. So it's still under the 200 word count that's required. Hopefully this helps. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to show you I don't think I'm going to record it. I'm just going to send it on over your way. Show you a model response to the first prompt. So this would be, an example response to the second prompt. I'm going to send you a model response to the first one. Have a wonderful week. Hopefully I'll feel better by next Saturday so that I'm completely on point and energetic. And I'll see you soon.